Welcome, everyone, to the Meaningful Hearts podcast, where we discuss the everyday questions that make us or break us if we let them. With your hosts, Drew and Daniela. Take our hands and let's walk this journey together. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Meaningful Hearts podcast, where Drew and Daniela take a walk into the wild side. In all seriousness, today we're going to talk about uncomfortable conversations when the truth really hurts, but the feedback is oh so awesome. Daniela, bring us in on this one. Music.
What a wonderful introduction. But yes, you and I have talked about uncomfortable conversations in previous episodes, specifically in one where we talked about the dynamics of healthy relationships. So uncomfortable conversations are important. But I was recently watching a video posted by Dr. Mark Hyman, who we've learned about from Tony Robbins. And he gave a framework for having uncomfortable conversations when the truth is harsh, and I thought it was really good. So I thought, why not bring it here in the confines or compound?
I think it's confines
of our world, like you and I and everybody listening to Meaningful Hearts. So he gave a little bit of a backstory as to how he learned to avoid having uncomfortable conversations, especially when the truth was harsh. So he said that he actually learned to lie from a pretty young age. He said that he had a raging alcoholic father who he pretty much had to keep satisfied all the time, because if you told the truth about something, it would be like hell, no type of constructive feedback, especially about his drinking. And it was because of this that he learned to not quite tell the truth and people please. And throughout his life and his work that he did with people, he learned that this is actually a form of manipulation. It's not in a harmful way, but more in a protective way. I must not say the honest truth because it's going to hurt somebody's feelings, or I don't know how they're going to react. Those are like the two main things. He also said that it's ultimately harmful to say yes when you mean no, which again goes back to the concept of needing to tell the truth, especially when it's hard. Make sense so far?
Yes.
Drew, can you recall a time in your life where somebody told you a harsh truth, or you said a harsh truth to somebody, and what that was like?
Damn. I've said so many harsh truths. Oh my God.
Or how about a time when you said a harsh truth, or two, I guess like two, you can go two ways, right? Because there's two ways harsh truths and uncomfortable conversations can go. They're either receptive and it goes well, even though it's really difficult, or it doesn't go the way that you want it to. I think if you would kindly share one of both, that would be awesome.
I would say a harsh truth, but what was more in the heat of the moment was when I got into an argument with my mom about how I was so reactive, and how I was such a cruel person, and how I could say such, mean things to her, because I basically, I told her that, that the way that I am reflects a lot on the way that I was treated as a child. And she dismissed my childhood as not being so bad. And I'm like, who are you to tell me what I experienced? She's like, you don't know what it's like. You don't know. You have no idea. I'm like, I have no idea. Excuse me. Who do you think you are? How can you talk to me this way? I'm your mother and all these things. And I was like, in all reality, I was like, you talk about all these things you went through. I was like, I experienced it tenfold. And I was like, you're the direct reason why where do you think I've learned this from? I literally said, I was like, the reason I am acting this way is because you taught me this. The way that you responded to your partner, the way that you spoke to us, it's a direct result of how I speak to you. And it comes to a point in my life where I am owning up to it and changing. But don't get it twisted. You're the person that taught me all this. It's learned. It's not something that just fell onto my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, it just became an explosion of more arguments. And you know what? You're really cruel. You're, disappointing. Like it didn't go good. There was no, it literally just, thank you, thanks, but no thanks. Threw it right back in my face and said, I'm a cruel person. And it was really ugly. It was not really good. That's a more of an intense one.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like a harsh truth. And it definitely sounds like it wasn't received well. Now, what about a time when it was received well by somebody and you said a harsh truth?
Okay.
Or maybe as difficult as it might have been, they were at least receptive. Like even if they got upset in the moment.
I would say somebody that could take real harsh criticism, and I am a fucking asshole. Yes, you could take some great criticism.
I raised my hand.
You could take some great criticism, but before we met, I did a lot of music and creative work with one of my closest friends, and he was not doing so hot as far as his singing, some of the music that we would create, some of the songs we would write, and he's like, "Yeah, what do you think?" And I was like, "Go to the store and get some Hefty bags." And he's like, "What do you mean, get some Hefty bags?" Go to the store and get some Hefty bags, because that shit was trash.
Oh my gosh, that's a blunt delivery. All right, for anybody curious, in the framework that I'm gonna share, it's not that harsh.
No, but it was more like, it was joking, but we would get at each other like that. But in all reality, I would tell him, like, "Listen, we need to change this, we need to do that." And he would always ask me how, and he would always, like, he would be so open to it. It wasn't like he was dismissive. I got more dismissive about things, especially my creative side, than he would. It was impressive, but it was usually always taken really well. I mean, somebody who's willing to learn, willing to fall, willing to get up and learn again, and always change something and not be dead set on something and say, "You know what, I'm going to change this. I'll take your advice. That sounds like a good idea. Let me change that and see what happens," and be very open to it. It was very awesome. It really was.
What did that do for your relationship with him? Or what has that done? Because I know this person is in your life. So what has that done for your relationship?
So he's
ultimately, when it comes friends,
I would say when it comes to really important things, he learns after the fact, after I told him what to do or how, what's the best advice. He would take it, but he wouldn't use it. And then he would do the thing, like the lesson would be taught, and he'd be like, "Oh, that's why I shouldn't do that. You know what? You were right." Okay. It was like that. He gets the right answer, and then he creates the video of what not to do, and then the more pops up. And it's like, wow, okay.
But he's still your friend, right? So
yes,
and you guys are really good friends. If he wasn't if you weren't willing to challenge him, and two, if he wasn't receptive, you guys would not be friends. Just like maybe in the disagreements and the arguments that you've had with your mom, if she had been a little bit more receptive, your relationship would have in some ways become more meaningful. Which is why I asked the question, because when Dr. Hyman was talking about it, one of his points was the reason why we have uncomfortable conversations, especially when they're harsh or the truth isn't pretty, is because it ultimately does help to build deeper meanings and connections, which is what you have with your friend. He's still here listening. He might take some time to learn. That's fine. But he holds you in high regard, and that you can challenge him. That you can be there and support him, which is ultimately the goal of having these uncomfortable conversations, especially when the truth is not pretty, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So this is a good point to start to actually share what the steps that Dr. Hyman gave, and then we can add a little bit of our input based on how we have uncomfortable conversations sometimes. So can you take a guess at what the first step might be? You, Drew.
The first step in the process?
Yeah.
I mean, having the uncomfortable conversation would usually start it, right?
Yeah, but you'd think that you'd get right into it, but no, he says that one of the best ways to start is actually to ask for permission from another person. I mean, you and I are a little bit different because we've kind of set that groundwork. Or actually, there have been times where you'll say something like, can I share something with you that kind of bothered me? Or, can we talk about this in a little while? So you do actually ask for permission. And I think I've done the same. So he says, yes, ask for permission, go to the person that you want to have this conversation with, and tell them that you'd love to talk to them about something, and ask them, is right now a good time? If not, when is a good time? Giving the person options is always helpful, and not, even if they say no, right? You kind of put it on them, versus saying, I want to tell you something that I think you did wrong, right? Because that's ultimately, at least for me and my understanding in uncomfortable conversations, is you want to try to mitigate defensiveness or attacking somebody, because that's not the point of an uncomfortable conversation, right? That's why so many relationships, there's so much conflict, because people feel attacked, and not just intimate relationships, but that's probably why your mom responded the way that she did, because she felt attacked. So that's the first step. Sound good so far?
Yes.
For our listeners, if you're not taking notes, I would definitely recommend a note or two, whether it's digital or handwriting. I think this is pretty good information.
And she's not asking, she's telling. Get that pen writing.
It's a recommendation. The second step is to, once you sit down with them, and like schedule a time, you explain your goals. It's always important to know the goal of an uncomfortable conversation, whether it's you want to understand them more, you just want to have an uncomfortable conversation, that within itself could be a goal, or be more connected, like I want to feel more connected to you, or maybe it's a conversation about intimacy or anything of that sense, right? The third is, now, this is what you said. This is when you actually start the conversation. And there's a very particular way that he recommends starting a conversation, which I actually really liked that he shared. And this is actually something I've also done in my work with my patients. He says that it's important to start with the positive. See them for who they are and the genuine person and the good things about them. Because again, it's not about attacking them when you feel like or when a person feels attacked, rather they're automatically on the defense. That's just how we are as human beings. So when you start with something positive about them, you see them for who they are, and then you ultimately start to take accountability for how you feel or the role that you played. Say, for example, you're having an uncomfortable conversation about, I don't know, your partner not wanting to take out the trash. Just an example. It's very minor because we're talking about the truth is harsh. But if you're upset with your partner for not taking out the trash, part of a way to take accountability is saying something along the lines of, I've had a really long day and I haven't been able to do this, and I feel unsupported in this aspect of taking out the trash. Again, just an example, but it's the framework. Does that make sense?
Yes.
What do you think so far about the 3 steps that I've shared, other than you agree because you've been nodding your head?
I think that's important to set the stage for everything before you do it. I think preparation is key, and your approach is, I'm in sales. Approach is everything. Even not to deviate from the subject, but one most important thing is when you visit or you're doing cold calling, you're walking into a business and you talk to the decision maker and you ask them if they have some time to speak. You ask them, you want to address their questions and concerns, and you'll write those questions down beforehand. You say, do I have permission to proceed and talk about, whatever we're talking about. And then you proceed from there. But you got to set the stage as opposed to just going right in and rifling questions and just going through it. First of all, it creates a terrible experience. And then you're just not acknowledging what they're looking for, or what maybe they have to say. You're going right into what's important to you. And that's not, it's not how it works.
Yeah, exactly. The preparation is important, setting the stage, how you go into it, which also, adding to that, you have to do so without judgment. Like you on the sales call, right? You want to make sure that you take into consideration all the different parties that are affected by the decision maker. And with uncomfortable conversations, when they're harsh, it is important to do it without judgment. This is how I see it. This is my experience. I might be wrong, but I want to share it with you. following that step is actually asking for their perspective without judgment. This is my perspective. This is how I see it. Tell me how you see it. What is your feedback to me? Because again, the goal, once it's been established, this is where you can kind of reiterate the goal. I want to understand your perspective and how we can feel more connected, or how can I help you feel heard? Yes, exactly. I just took a big deep breath. Make sense?
Yes.
Then the last step in uncomfortable conversations is coming to some form of an agreement. This is probably the most challenging one, because you could be prepared and think about how you want to deliver and make sure that the person isn't feeling attacked, but you're still, and I think that's part of the reason why uncomfortable conversations, especially when you don't have the nicest things to say, are so difficult, because you don't know how the other person is going to react. In an ideal world, the other person would say, yeah, that's great, I hear you, you hear me, etc., etc. But that isn't actually always the case. And sometimes the agreements might take a little while. I know when you and I have had difficult conversations. We discuss, we take some time, and sometimes I know you've had to reiterate, I've had to reiterate. I understand. I'm not trying to invalidate. I'm just trying to share my experience with you. So coming to an agreement may be challenging, but it's important that some type of agreement is come to, because you don't want to leave the conversation with feelings of bitterness, feelings of resentment, because it doesn't do anybody good. So saying things like, I get this, I hear you, how can we be more mindful of each other? How can I meet your needs? Because it also comes down to needs not being met, especially in intimate relationships.
I also think that a lot of people have unresolved arguments. They're just arguments. That's all they are. They never come to the table with an agreement. It's more like, let me just purge this bone that I got to pick with you, and you're going to pick with me. We're not going to have a resolution. There's no plan for a resolution. We're going to just argue it out for now until next time. And so it is very key to tie it up, right? To have an offer on the table on both ends.
Yeah.
Like an agreement, because you do want to move past this. This is how relationships are forged. It can get hot and heavy. It can get a little ugly. But overall, the goal together is, I want to hash this out so we can move forward and keep building on those layers of a relationship. Not have, like, we're not two lawyers in a courtroom yelling at each other and see who has the better argument.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I know for me and you, like I said before, you and I have established a groundwork of being able to have uncomfortable conversations, but that doesn't mean that we have an uncomfortable conversation in the last 5 minutes and then that's it, we're done, yay, let's go, whatever, let's go on about our day. It doesn't actually work that way. I know we've had reoccurring uncomfortable conversations, whether you challenge my perspective or I challenge your perspective about the things that go on in our lives. And part of it is practice. It does take practice, but one of my hopes in sharing this is that it's a guide, because having an end destination without a guide, doesn't necessarily always work. I mean, it can if you don't necessarily have any restrictions and you're just like, yeah, I'm just going to get there and I'm just going to walk south. Whatever south is, that's how I'm going to go. That can definitely work. But when it comes to uncomfortable conversations, because they're so difficult or can be so difficult, having that guide is important, which is where the steps that I've just shared come in hand. I hope I'm not redundant, but I probably am. It's a thing.
That's how you learn. You have to reiterate a couple of times.
Yeah, right.
There's nothing wrong with that,
Yeah.
I think that knowing how to get back to that place, if you honor this as a tool, right? You have to look at and respect this as a tool that you could use. Now, if you don't, you disregard it, then it's whatever. You don't want to accidentally stumble upon a solution, not know how you got there. And I think it's very important that it is in the steps. It is stepped and broke down, right? That's the key to this. So write it down. And
did you say broked down?
Broke down?
Or broken down?
I don't know. We will never know. We'll have to listen to the episode.
Right.
The magic of recording.
Yes. So I think one of the final things that I would want our listeners to take away from this is that it is a process. And again, it's not something that you can do one time and just, magically. I mean, it could if you're willing to be if you're really willing to be that uncomfortable and willing to take on the other person's reactions. But what I would hope that people would take away from, I guess, the steps and like the framework is to remember that you can take the time to write it out beforehand. I've done this plenty of times when I've had to have uncomfortable conversations. And the main thing to remember is, or one of the main things among so many, is that if you can try to remember to go into it being curious about the other person's experience as much as you want to feel heard, that gives you a higher chance of things working out in your favor.
Yeah, I believe so. But I also think that just because you're going into a disagreement doesn't mean you also have to just give in and just say yes to the person.
That's true.
And that's that either. Be reasonable with both sides. I mean, sometimes people come into a conversation very rational and petty. You know, if you're going into it with a level of maturity, you have to understand that you're walking into a level, with this to be resolved in a respectable way where it's in the middle where we both respectively do this on both sides. And it's not you just knowing you're right to an extent and just bowing down just to shut the other person up. That's not what this is about. So just to clarify.
Yeah. So you're saying to not go in fully giving in either.
Yes. Okay. Have a solid ground. I stand firm on certain things. You stand firm on certain things. Mm-hmm. It's okay to agree to disagree. If it's something that just can't be resolved, there are certain things that just can't, I guess, in a sense, can't be resolved in the way that you'd want to. But a level of respect, walking away with a level of respect and understanding, I think is key too. Like
how you feel about AI and how I feel about AI. But that's a conversation for another time.
Yeah, don't worry.
I do want to take a moment to thank our listeners for sitting here listening to us rant. We hope that it gives you some type of value, even if it's a sentence or two.
Yes, we appreciate you all for listening. Thank you very much.